Welcome. You're on the Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to understand the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we discuss technology, startups, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. Today, I decided to talk about the future human. I hope I have intrigued you. Who is the future human who will harness the achievements of the unfolding digital revolution? We, and I mean myself as well, me including, will tend to discuss technologies at the heart of our current paradigm a lot more than we tend to discuss actually the human side. Who is behind it? And in this episode, I decided to focus on three kind of phenomenon, three concepts, or rather three brief sketches of the future human: Homo Deus, Homo Digital, and Homo Creator. Homo Digital is, I don't know who coined this concept. Homo Deus is coined by Yuval Harari. And I'm sure that there are a lot more visions of the future human, and I will come probably to this topic again and again because I think it's so important. We need to understand how to nurture such a future human, how to educate him or her, and so on. A usual disclaimer before I go any further: the views that I'm presenting here, all these discussions, all the views, opinions are my own, and they do not represent the official view of the organizations and employers I'm associated with. Now, let's start with Homo Deus, and that's a notion, a concept that has been offered to us by Yuval Noah Harari. He's an Israeli historian. His books are very clever, they're very well written, a pleasure to read, provocative, and wildly successful. This book in particular, which the full title is Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, appeared in English in 2014. It was instantly an international bestseller, endorsed by Barack Obama and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. There were TED Talks and public lectures and invites to Silicon Valley. He's also now the thought leader of the World Economic Forum, WEF, in Davos. And this is the place where all the so-called elites congregate. But before we get into how he sees Homo Deus, it's important to understand the kind of the philosophical underpinnings of some elements of his worldview in order to appreciate the vision of the human being of the future, Homo Deus, according to him. He does mention, among other threats to humanity, things like climate change, environmental collapse, and the threat of a nuclear war. But essentially, he talks about transformation and a shift in the way we think about human beings rather than the death of the human race as we know it. Harari, in particular, is interested in the grand ideology of liberal humanism, which he says is one of the most prevalent in the world. By the way, it's not. Only 40% of the world population are believed to live under some form of liberal governments. There are two critical elements to liberal humanism. One is that the human beings consist of individual selves who possess free will. And the second one is that all human beings are morally equal to each other. He calls human liberalism a religion, not so much even a philosophy or something like that, but or a way of thinking, worldview, but a religion. And he also saying that modern science has undermined both of these assumptions of liberal humanism. So Harari writes off completely free will. Science shows that there is no free will, according to him, and human choices are simply the result of genes, hormones, and our neurons. Further scientific advances will completely undermine this liberal humanism position that all human beings are morally equal. These are the advancements that I'm referring to are the ones associated with human enhancement, and you can read transhumanism. Those that greatly enhance the mental and physical capacities of some humans, but not the others, and that's an important point. He repeatedly over and over again says this mantra ad nauseum. Organisms are algorithms. We are nothing special. We have no immortal soul. Our emotions and our thoughts are the product of electrochemical impulses, where they can be modeled, and we can use formal, problem-solving rules or algorithms to solve all these problems, address the impulses. There's nothing fixed in human nature. The only thing that can be said with certainty about human nature, that it can and will change. And so Harari argues that liberal humanism will likely be replaced in the 21st century by the new techno-religions, and he dubs them, techno-humanism and deities. So the only real thing to him are our bodies, our biology, our neurochemistry, and our bodily feelings. So the material and the physical, right? There is no place for the imaginative or the ideological side or the creative side of the human being. It's not real. It doesn't exist. He clearly rejects God and divinity, at least in our traditional understanding. The universe is devoid of meaning and purpose. His own definition of divinity, if you look at it, it's sort of superhuman bodily and mental faculties. Those who gain access to proprietary algorithms to re-engineer their brains, bodies, and minds will become gods. And those who don't will be kind of rendered economically useless, that we are useless eaters. Then it's probably need to go a little bit deeper into this new religion of deism or techno-humanism, and it can be summed up in one phrase: everything is a data flow. And human beings' value is contribution to this data flow. What is dataism? Well, it's that algos will be able to understand and satisfy our desires far better than we ever could. We will have bionic ears, we'll have bionic feet, nanorobots in our bloodstream will repair diseases and injuries. There will be wearables, implantable devices will expand our senses, will alter our moods. Then some biological tools will re-engineer our genes and will give us new and improved flesh, blood, and neurons in our brains. Science, according to him, has discovered that human behavior, as he says, is determined by hormones, genes, and synapses rather than by free will, let alone a soul. We're easily manipulated by means of drugs, genetic engineering, or direct brain stimulation. And so, according to him, in order to raise global happiness levels, we need to manipulate human biochemistry. We must re-engineer, in other words, Homo sapiens, so that we can enjoy everlasting pleasure. I need to stop here because many people, including myself, will disagree with this completely, because pursuit of pleasure, in my view, is not the purpose of life. But once technology, according to Harari, enables us to re-engineer human minds, Homo sapiens, he says, will disappear, human history will come to an end, and completely new kind of process will begin. Our species will be upgraded into gods through the efforts of biological engineering, cyborg engineering, or the engineering of non-organic things. So when you sort of hear this or listen to this or read this, it kind of says that in order to become more godlike, we need to become more machine-like. He further says that some economists predict that sooner or later, unenhanced humans will be completely useless. So how does he see humanity's future? Well, in the hands of technical experts in biotechnology, AI, of course, computer science, cognitive science. Human beings will cease to be agents. Our authority will be taken over by algorithms that will be written by humans, these algos, and then will be written by AI itself. So what about society and humankind? There will be two classes, I'm happy to report, or should we say two biological species. The wealth will be concentrated, you guess it, in the hands of a very tiny few, a tiny elite that will own all the powerful algorithms. Some of them will be then gods, members of a new species, Homo Deus, a new elite of upgraded superhumans. They will be very clever, rich, and so they will control all the knowledge that controls the rest of the humankind. Unenhanced human beings, that's people like you and me, because of course, to get this enhancement, it's very expensive. Gene therapy is expensive, human augmentation is expensive, biorobotics and arms and legs, that could be expensive too. We're supposed to live our very miserable lives in the shade of this upgraded elites. The masses, of course, will have to be fed. So how will they be fed? According to him, people must do something or they will go crazy. What will they do one day? Will they discover the joys of art? Probably not. It's more like that the useless masses will find satisfaction in shopping, drugs, computer games, and VR, which will provide them with far more excitement and emotional engagement than the drab reality outside. So the future will be there, but it won't be evenly distributed, very clear. It's taken directly from the script of Ready Player One. It's a sci-fi dystopian movie. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. So, Homo Deus, but not for everyone. Just one group of people will be it. Okay, now do we have anything more inspiring than this Harari's vision of Homo Deus? I recently came across an interesting report and an interesting project, which I will call Foresight Project. It was released in 2021, and the full name of it is How Will We and Our Children Live in the Next 100 Years? It's compiled together by Foresight Group, and it's a group of Russian and international experts. Perhaps it exists in English too, but I read it in Russian. The purpose, according to them, the purpose and the motivation for writing this report was to offer an inspiring future, which is actively crafted by humans, which is a good positive thing. And they open up their report with a quote by a very famous quote by Buckminster Fuller, which says, "We're called to be the architects of the future, not its victims." They draw on complexity in evolutionary theory, and I think just like with Yuval Harari, it's important to understand what are the philosophical and some kind of theoretical views underpinning their vision of the future and the future human. At one point in our existence, a complex system, like, for example, our socioeconomic order, is faced with limits to the mode of its existence. This is what they're saying. For example, it may have exhausted its traditional energy sources, which is a big problem right now. So the system enters a period of instability and can actually collapse. But under certain conditions, the system is capable of getting out of this catastrophe zone, if you will, and take a complexity leap to overcome the barrier intrinsic to that particular phase of evolution at which we're in at the moment. And it can transition to a different level of existence, a new stability level, or a new vision of a desired future. And then it can assume various new characteristics and a different structure. According to them, we are now, for the past 50 years as humanity, have been in this transition period. We're overcoming now the complexity barrier between the industrial phase and the new phase, which doesn't really have any name yet or clearly defined name yet. Some people, by the way, call it post-capitalism. Or maybe this is something else. So right now, according to them, at the beginning of the 21st century, we're rapidly approaching the phase of catastrophic development, if you will. There are threats to the current socioeconomic order, which are growing. There is evolutionary pressure, and our civilization is truly at a crossroads. Either it changes its principles of its own existence and transitions to a more complex way of organizing, or it collapses. we want to leap into the future, of course. We don't want to collapse, and we want to go into this world beyond the barrier that partitions the two phases, the phase that we're currently in and the next phase. And so the characteristics of this vision of the future and the processes that define it are what they call rich, regenerative, intelligent, complex, and holistic or harmonizing. And because the way we want to overcome this phase barrier is dependent on how the civilization is organized, then we can look at 4 interdependent layers. The techno-economic one, which is the base layer, then the management and governance layer. The third layer is socioeconomic, or rather sociocultural practices. And layer number 4 is worldview and thought, that is cognitive layer. And they map out this future into 100 years. I personally am not that interested into the next 100 years or 70 years plus. I think what's more important to understand is where are we now and in the near future. We live in a very complex world, which is volatile, and predicting anything beyond 10, 15 or 20 years, I think, is a bit of a stretch, right? So we're looking at what's going to happen in the next 15 years. And I looked at these 4 layers of what they're saying will happen there. So starting with economics, we're going to transition to new energy sources and circular economy. There will be a rejection of the old consumption-based economy. I think that's a good idea. That creates new wants and unprecedented pace. So people want things they don't really need. Sharing economy will be part of it. Virtualization, moving online, new contractual work, and gig economy, they see a place for it too. Then we will need to rethink the meaning of work from a job to sustain oneself to self-actualization and being creators or carrying out creative work. And they see, interestingly enough, UBI or Universal Basic Income as a means of doing this. And I'll come back to this important point about UBI further on. So that's the first layer. The second one is management and governance. And in their view, it's all about things global, like global policies on climate change and ecology, carbon tax, global fiscal policy, like universal global corporate tax of 15%. They're talking about global biomedical policies, requirements of PCR testing, ID passports, vaccine certificates as a condition of free movement across borders. So very, very global perspective, if you will. The third layer is socio-cultural practices. And I was personally particularly interested in education because I'm an educator, how they see the kind of future graduate. They correctly point out that modern society, given the level of uncertainty that we live in, needs a very different type of an individual. It has to be an achiever, a creative person, non-routine thinker, quick, reflexive decision maker. The university's role will also be transformed. It will no longer be a factory for the production of knowledge and skilled graduates, but rather an environment to grow the seeds, the kernel of the future society. It can be teams, it can be projects, new startups, and even prototypes of townships. And then they're also saying that education is going to be student-centric and learning will be continuous. Who could argue with that? And the fourth one, which interested me probably most of it all, is kind of the worldview and thought layer or cognitive layer. And what they're recommending is to adopt the feminine way of thinking. In other words, the way of thinking that's more intrinsic and natural to women. It's emotional, empathetic, and intuitive. Feminization of management and embracing female leadership is also what they recommend, because female leaders tend to be long-term thinkers and long-term oriented. They are non-confrontational. They are careful risk takers, and they have a systemic approach to solving problems. There were other interesting cognitive elements that this report mentioned, and particularly the role of AI. AI, they see it as a way, as a tool to help a human to find a place or role for his or her talent, whatever is in high demand, and helping them to show the way how this talent can be nurtured. They also talk about new forms of human organizations that are being born. They call it hybrid collective intellect, collective human machine systems combining the power of individual perceptions and thinking with collective co-creation and machine learning. So things and processes like goal setting, decision making, learning, and creation will be what humans do, while AI will have a supporting role like document search and analytics. They also see a role for immersive AI, haptic interfaces, brain-computer interfaces, implants, and non-invasive devices, and that will form, in their view, a new communication milieu, or what is sometimes referred to as neural net. Now, I personally have a couple of reservations or problems with this vision. And I'll start with the first one, which is around all things global. I don't think that there is anything global anymore. Arguably, the elites stopped globalization with COVID. We live in a multipolar world. There are different visions of the future. The Anglo-Saxon vision, Europe has a different vision, Eurasia, BRICS, Africa, you name it. It's more about multipolarity rather than one single solution for each and every country. Every country and every regional bloc will find their own solutions, I think. So all these things, global transition, global management and governance, global ID, global vax passes, I simply don't buy into it. But my biggest kind of concern and criticism is related to the other part, and that's how they see creative work on UBI. So creators on universal basic income, it's kind of two things antithetical to each other. And particularly I see a problem with that if this UBI is tied to some form of digital ID and programmable money, or CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. There are limits, I think, on human creativities and freedom. They're not boosters of this creativity. My view is if indeed we people have to be engaged in the economics of self-realization or economics of mass uniqueness, as they say in their report, then we produce unique products and services, and we need to be adequately compensated for this uniqueness, right? My question to them is, does this also mean that classes will disappear, almost like a la Harari? And in particular, will there be a middle class? What about the elites? Will they be also on the universal basic income? It's hard for me to imagine. In generally, I don't think this is a very compelling vision to me. It's almost like a reflection of Homo digital view of humankind, which I don't subscribe to. So I think what we need to have is really a better vision. The visions tend to be either no positive and inspiring visions of the future, everything is about crisis or anti-something, or this vision tends to be very, very vague. Just recently, I listened to an interesting video where educational bureaucrats were asked by a journalist what would the future graduate look like. And there was really no clear answer past, some form of digital literacy. In other words, they should be able to press some buttons. And that's a very impoverished view of humankind, I think. What needs to happen, and here I'm drawing on some views of Dr. Averyanov, because I really subscribe to what he's describing and his worldview, although I do have my own ideas, of course. Firstly, let's start with science, as it plays such an important role. Science in human beings, not so much even technology, science. And it's symptomatic that a lot of scientific effort in the last 50 years of the 20th century in the West, and that's particularly the US, because it's the large investor in R&D, was channeled into a very narrow path. It's the internet, mobile networks, VR, and artificial intelligence, of course. These technologies are responsible for virtualization, or I would say distortion of reality. And these technologies, by their very nature, take humanity and the noosphere as a very close system. And at the same time, important work, for example, in space exploration, if we look at these past 50 years of the 20th century, which could have taken humanity beyond our confines, beyond the planetary boundaries, they didn't receive significant funding at all, particularly past JFK. And although the idea of UBI may be seductive, it's dehumanizing. And Jaron Lanier, who is considered to be one of the fathers of VR, maybe even the father of VR, is very highly critical of UBI as a solution to this AI type of apocalypse, because it robs us humans from our intentionality, individuality, and agency. So lumping consumers will eventually turn into degenerates. A human being should be able to work, create, and fight for his food if necessary. And this food doesn't have to be material only, physical only. It can also be spiritual. So to live like a hypnotized, vegetable in the world of endless virtual entertainment and pleasure seeking, a la Harari, is really shameful. There will be opportunities for all human beings in the new world to self-realize and self-actualize. And yes, mass customization will be part of it. We will gladly compensate talented craftsmen and talented artisans who create exclusive furniture and clothing and shoes and beautiful household items, and generally make the world around us a lot more pleasant and beautiful. Probably you have noticed this big necklace that I'm wearing right now. It's a really big piece of jewelry. You can't miss it, can't you? And it's also coming from a very talented craftsperson. It's very unique. I don't think it's produced in a factory at all. And it's filled with love and beauty and really precious, very precious to me. Well, let's continue this on the topic of where could we have been and where not, because we were somehow deprived of this scientific progress as humans. We could have been interplanetary species and also gone into ocean exploration as well. We are going into space not only because of economic considerations, like planetary resources are running out or there may be valuable resources on our planet, but because it's kind of a missionary act as well. It's very interesting that Kennedy, when Gagarin went into space in 1961, didn't see it as much of a military operation or a space race at all, but to him it was a victory for all humanity. I personally see the human of the future as an optimistic, visionary, a dreamer, an all-rounded individual, very well educated and with high-level communication skills. You probably noticed that the war that we are fighting at the moment is a war of semantics as well. It's about meaning, signs, and symbols. I also see this person as creative, nonconformist, and of course having very high moral standards and values that transcend the boundaries of one particular culture or even one particular religion. I think that the person of the future is going to be a happy non-consumer, because happy people don't consume as much. And by the way, there is a very interesting Harvard study on happiness and healthy aging that's one of the longest running empirical surveys in history, and it found a very strong correlation between happiness and close relationships like spouses, families, friends, and social circles. So be happy, future human, and it's time for Homo Creator, I think. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly enjoyed putting it together for you, very different visions of the future and the future human. Thank you for joining, and I will be again with you next time, next Friday, 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thank you.